It's almost 48 hours since Rachel Reeves delivered the budget, and I think the dust is beginning to settle. But there's been phenomenal backlash on all sides of the House, over the government's decision to scrap the two-tier cap on benefit, and also they've done what they said that they absolutely wouldn't do, and that is to raise tax on working people. Joining me on today's show to talk about the budget and stories of the day, I'm very grateful to Ian Murray MP. So, welcome to People and Politics. Ian, thank you very much for coming on to my podcast again for the second time. Thank you. It's good to see you.
Oh, it's great to be on, and it's nice to see you, David. I remember doing the pod. I think was it 2 years ago now. Probably I did the last one, but it's always great to be back on, and nice to see you doing so well.
But yeah, it must have been 2 years now, and I'm really enjoying doing it. Thank you.
And should I be addressing you as podcast award nominee?
Oh, steady, possibly. But I'm really thrilled to have been shortlisted. I'm sure I really look forward to the event in January, and the people I'm going to meet is going to be great. So
yeah, it'll be brilliant.
Well,
good luck with it. Maybe next time I come on, you'll be you get on your bookshelf behind you. You can have your award, your Oscar.
That would be very nice, wouldn't it? Yeah. So I was gonna start, of course, the big thing, because it's about 40 hours since the budget, and the dust is beginning to settle. And just looking back at the budget, can you understand, or do you think Keir Starmer understands that there's a lot of angry people out there, and a lot of really disappointed people? And do you think Keir Starmer gets that?
Well, I mean, I think, David, if you think back, let's just wind the clock back a little bit. That from the very first day that Labour was elected to government back in July 2024, the media has been in some kind of frenzy about budgets. And from the day after the last budget, which was last October in 2024, they've been speculating about this tax, that tax, the deficit, the debt, the fiscal gap, the fiscal drag. The leader of the opposition's been asking the Prime Minister at PMQs if he'll put up this tax and that tax and this tax and that tax. And of course, if he says no, they just move on to the next one. And if he says yes, he's undermining the budget process. So he says no, and then all the press are full of, oh, well, he's denied that taxes he's not saying if taxes will go up, and he's said quite clearly that he's denied whether or not they would go up or down. So the speculation has been in overdrive, partly because of the way in which the economy is. And the background to all of that, of course, is that, and the public voted for this. Don't forget that back in July 2024, at the general election, the public voted to get rid of the Tories in such a large margin because of the mess they had made of the economy. And this and that therefore transpires to the very day in which we took office. We had to sort that economic mess out. And the public understand that because they voted to get the Tories out because they knew that the economy was in such a mess. That's taken longer and been much more difficult because it's ingrained. And if you look at where we are, because of the national debt being so high at £2.5 trillion, which the Tories doubled incidentally while they were in office, the debt repayments on that are so high, the gilt yields are so high because of the general economic situation across the world, that the biggest spending department in government at the moment is debt interest.
Right.
It's so it's huge, and of course every single, and just to put it into context, a 0.25 percentage point increase in gilt yields costs the taxpayer £17 billion a year in interest payments alone. So that's a huge amount. So what the Chancellor and the Prime Minister have had to do, but have wanted to do, is to make sure that the markets are calm, those gilt yields are not rising because of the costs of the debt, and are able to give reassurance to the markets while investing in the public services that were on the floor. And I think what the budget did 48 hours ago was build on what was happening last year. And of course, we've asked people to pay a little bit more, whether it be through the freezing of tax thresholds or mansion taxes. But if you look at both budgets, both last year and this year, and I would encourage your listeners to do this, the distributional analysis by both the Institute of Fiscal Studies and the OBR shows that we've taken from those that have the most and given it to those that have had the least. And that's both budgets have done exactly that. And that has been investing in public services at the same time. So stable economy, because we can't afford with our debt repayments for that to be unstable. Interest rates have come down because of that stability. Markets are stable because of that stability. And now we're able to invest in public services. And of course, that's been hard, but it's been necessary.
Yeah, and yeah, I mean, yeah, like people voted on the Tories out, but they also voted the Labour in on the basis that they were not going to raise tax for working people. So would it have been better if Rachel Reeves had come out, say, 6 months ago, 9 months ago, and said, look, we've discovered this black hole, we've spoken about already, and we're going to raise that. And should she not have just raised income tax and taken the hit square on the chin rather than do it in the sort of roundabout way and by freezing thresholds and putting tax on electric cars? Would she not have been better to be, I suppose, a bit more honest in a way?
Well, I mean, don't forget that the thresholds had already been frozen till 2029 anyway.
But she
This is
extended
future
that.
thresholds, and I think the press have been very unkind at not explaining that properly to the public on the basis that a lot of the newspapers were going, income tax, people are going to be hit with higher income tax, but that's not the case until 28, 29, and things might have changed by then. But Rachel did say that. She did that speech, 3 or 4 weeks ago now, that said that she might have to look at putting up income tax because what subsequently happened, and this is something again that's quite complicated, but for the person in the street to see. But the OBR, which is the independent body that sets all of the growth targets, all of the impacts of government policy, decided to change the methodology they were using on the UK's productivity post COVID. So what this was is they were redrawing productivity for the previous government. The result of all of that was that productivity went down by more than they had already anticipated, which essentially wiped out the Chancellor's headroom, which is the amount of money she has on top of the budget for unforeseen circumstances. It's your rainy day fund, if you like. And the OBR, because of the change of that productivity on the previous government, wiped that headroom out, which meant the markets got jittery, which meant the Chancellor had to come out and say, I have to either cut spending or raise more taxes. Subsequently, what happened is the OBR figures weren't as bad as the Chancellor thought they were going to be. These are independent figures, but the stuff that we said we would abide by, because Liz Truss didn't abide by those figures, and look what happened to the economy, which we're all still paying for. So those weren't as bad as they were projected to be, and therefore she didn't have to increase income tax in that way. So there's no conspiracy theory here, or there's no lies, or there's no trying to pull the wool over people's eyes. What happened was the OBR decided that they were going to redraw the framework, which made the position worse. And she said, we're going to have to try and deal with that. But ultimately, the figures, when they were finalised, weren't as bad as she thought they were going to be.
But I lose to the electorate, who I say probably don't understand. It probably lose very bad to the electorate because it does look like a series of broken manifesto pledges and a series of broken promises, and it can't be good for the government or for Keir Starmer. And people are asking whether or not he's done things like removing the digital cap, which is a good thing to for a lot of people. But again, a lot of people say, well, he said that he absolutely wouldn't do that. So has Rachel Reeves done that to appease backbenchers, or has she done that to because that's what her and Keir really want to do?
Well, I
What do
mean,
you
look,
think?
yeah, look, there's a number of aspects to that question, but let me answer them in the way in which the Prime Minister has made clear. Now, this big debate happened at the general election, and it happened when Labour were finalising the manifesto because the two-child cap removal was not in the manifesto. We had all said it was an abhorrent policy. We had all said that the rape clause was one of the most pernicious policies that any government had ever put in place. And we wanted to get rid of it. But the reason it wasn't in the manifesto was because we couldn't afford it. We wanted to be honest with the public that we could only make these kinds of promises if we could show where the money was coming from, and we couldn't show where the money was coming from, and then it wasn't in the manifesto. Keir and Rachel have always been clear, including myself and everyone else, that we wanted to get rid of this policy, but we had to be able to pay for it. What we've subsequently done is there was an amendment to the King's speech at the start of the Labour government, if you remember, that we voted against in terms of removing the two-child cap because we couldn't pay for it. There was no money to pay for it. Now that there is a bit more money in there, and now the decisions that have been made last October and in this budget, we're now able to be in a position to remove that. Now that's the technical side of it, but the purpose of this is also that Labour governments are the only governments that lower child poverty. Child poverty went up by nearly 1 million under the Tories.
Yeah.
This brings child poverty down by 450,000. It's the largest fall in child poverty of any government since records began. And therefore, that's why you do this kind of stuff, because this is what Labour governments do. So there's no breaking of manifesto pledges here. There's no, well, you said this, but you did that, because we always said if we could afford it and show where the money was coming from, we would then remove it. And we've shown where the money is coming from. The gambling levy has been increased in order for us to raise over £1 billion. There's money in the budget coming through the freezing of the income tax thresholds. There's a bit more headroom in there. And we said in our manifesto we'd cut waiting lists, which is being diverted to the NHS. We said we would cut the cost of living, which is what the budget was about. And we said if we could afford it, we'd move the two-child cap. So now we can afford it, we're removing it. So there's really no conspiracy theory here. And our opponents on this kind of stuff, like the SNP, for example, they had the powers and had 8 years to remove
Yeah.
the
There's
cap, and
been
decided
nothing.
not to. And if you remember, Nicola Sturgeon decided not to in Parliament publicly, and she was asked why, and she said, because we can't afford it. So this is exactly what's happened. And if you've seen Keir's news pieces yesterday, when he was asked about this, he was passionate about this. Labour government's lower child poverty. That's what we're here to do. It's about aspiration and opportunity, and that's why we've made the decision. But it wasn't in our manifesto, and we voted against it in the King's speech because we couldn't afford it. We didn't know where the money could come from.
I've read said that the S&P had £155 million set aside to lift the cap in Scotland, but they didn't do it. And so now that the cap's been lifted across the UK, and technically they should have that money somewhere.
Well, and David, let me be very clear about this to your listeners. That £155 million could have been spent to lift the cap much earlier. But let's not forget that £150 million extra that they've got is because of the Labour government coming in last year. Since July 2024, the Scottish Government has £10 billion extra to spend because of decisions of the Labour government to end austerity and to fund our public services properly. The big question for your listeners is going to be, where has all that money gone? And that's a big question they should be asking
Of
the
course.
SNP election.
Yeah.
So, all of this stuff that they say about we can't do this, we can't do that, we want to do this, we want to do that, they are much better off with a Labour government. And the social experiments that the Tories put in place in terms of the two-child cap were social experiments that had nothing to do with the welfare bill. And of course, the social experiment the SNP have done, the political experiment was, it was much more political expedient for them not to remove the two-child cap because it was an attack on Labour than it was for them to remove it. And that says more about them than it says about the Labour Party's position today.
Of course, and we'll wait and see what the SNP do with that money, or if indeed they come clean that they've got so much extra money, but I suspect we'll never
Well,
see it.
don't forget, they've just underspent the budget by £1 billion. And I'm doing
And
this today after having been at Gracemont Primary School. And Gracemont Primary School, which is in one of the most deprived areas of my constituency and one of the most deprived housing estates in Scotland, could desperately do with some of that money. So they're £1 billion underspend. They're not spending the money on people's priorities, and essentially they are a political government doing political things for their own ends rather than trying to make the country better for people.
well, I think the electorate have run for that, by now, and hopefully, next May they'll be out of office or civilian, reduced majority. But I hope the bad about it. And there was one more thing about the budget that can irk me is literally she started to tax electric cars by a penny or 3 pence. Well, there's two aspects to that. I thought one to put people off buying electric cars. And secondly, if people have already bought electricity for their home and they've already paid tax on that electricity, why should they then pay tax again to put into the cars?
Yeah, I mean, it's just trying to square that circle about in terms of the reduction in petrol and diesel use, the taxation on that, and the road tax. There's a
But that's not going to help that.
Yeah, well,
Uh,
the numbers of EV drivers now are huge. I mean, it's a difficult thing to do, but again, it's one of these big decisions that have to be made by someone at some point, and we've decided to make them. And the overall budget is about trying to find that balance between cutting the cost of living for people, but making sure there's a contribution being put in by others. And it's a very very small contribution on the EVs, but really important for us to be able to have to make that decision because wherever you go in terms of the budget, that was quite clear that you had to balance out what was happening in the economy through income and spend that money very wisely in terms of what people's priorities are in terms of cost of living and our public services. So it's not these things aren't easy. If they were easy, we wouldn't do them. But I think the overall point I would make with that, David, is that I was in the House of Commons chamber yesterday for the second day of the budget debate, and the opposition, all of the opposition parties, but primarily the Liberal Democrats, but also the Tories, stood up and railed against every single tax increase that the Labour government have announced since we came to power in 2024, and then reeled off a list of things that they wanted additional money spent on. You cannot have both.
oh,
And people can argue and say, well, your choices around X or Y are the wrong choices. I would have done something different. That's fine because politics is about choices. And people can say, well, you should have spent money on this rather than that. And again, that's also about choices. But you can't have all the spending with none of the revenues.
no.
And all of the opposition parties have said spend, 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 but don't do this, don't do that, don't do this. And that's a huge amount. And I think what we're trying to do is we're trying to balance that by saying that we understand this is difficult. We understand the economy is in a difficult place and we understand people's finances and cost of living is still in a difficult place. But we have to take these steps in order to make things better. And I think now that the budget's done and things are starting to feed through with growth being up this year and other aspects of it, we're really going to start to see things happening. And I hope that the decisions that we've made, Labour decisions that we've been made to invest in public services and cost of living, people are really going to start to feel it.
But do you think this budget will go much way to kickstart growth? Because growth is not big, and I think even on the eve of the budget, it was downgraded by the OBR, and the OBR not by much, but it was still downgraded, and growth is not high. And so was it much in the budget that you think will stimulate growth?
Yeah, well, and that's the big challenge for all economies, but more so for us because we've had such a stagnant economy for the last 15 years, and breaking out of that's difficult. And the Prime Minister and the Chancellor have been very clear about this, that the OBR have upgraded growth this year to 1.5%, but you're right, they have downgraded ever so slightly in future years. But what the Prime Minister and the Chancellor are saying is it's now up to us, it's a task for us to beat them. Let's confound those numbers. We've brought in record inward investment into this country in terms of other countries and organisations investing. I mean, we're talking hundreds of billions of pounds. We've got new trade deals with India, the US, and the EU, with more to come. We're really trying to drive that innovation through tech and through AI. We're investing in our public services, investing in people so they can spend money in the economy. So it's up to us to try and drive those figures up, because that's the big challenge. Because if you create a bigger pie, you can then slice it up better. And it's our task to, the only way out of this is to create that bigger pie. And let's not forget the downgrading of the OBR forecast in terms of growth beyond this year are as a result of the productivity changes they made under the Tory government, which has created this bit of the situation in the budget this year. So we need to now confound our critics and get that growth into the economy. And I'm quite excited about this. We shouldn't be talking the economy down, because the opportunities are there in green energy and tech and AI, computer games or creative industries. They're unprecedented, and we should grab them with both hands.
But there's a lot of people say that, the freezing the thresholds for tax and raising minimum wages is not good for a kickstart in the economy. What would you say to them?
Well, if it's the case that we can't pay people properly to be out of poverty because it affects the economy, then I think people are on the wrong page. Increasing the national minimum wage and national living wage is good for the economy because it puts much more money into people's pockets. And people who tend to be on those lower wages have a higher propensity to spend that money locally. So it stays in local economies. And, I always remember back to the chief executive of Next last year saying, they're going to have to put 10% on a pair of jeans in order to pay their staff the new living wage. And my thought was, well, I'm happy to pay 50 pence more. So 1%, they said, on a pair of jeans. I'm happy to spend 50 pence more on a £50 pair of jeans, knowing that the people that are selling me are being paid properly. So I have no problem with that whatsoever. The issue of the tax thresholds, of course, is a big one, but this won't kick in until 28, 29, 29, 30. And if we can confound those growth targets, the economy will be in a much better place by then, and getting those costs of living down. So, the paying people properly in terms of national living wage and national minimum wage is the right thing to do. And the companies that have been doing this for years without government intervening have benefited from it hugely.
Yeah, but the way it kicks out of the economy is putting money in people's pockets, but that's not what this budget has just done. It's kind of opposite.
Well, it has put more money in people's pockets in the sense it's cut the cost of living with energy bills coming down. It's putting more money in people's pockets in terms of the lower paid, in terms of minimum wage. It's putting more money in people's pockets if your children are in poverty. And the 1.5% growth this year, whilst not good, is 0.5% higher. Inflation's coming down by 0.4% next year projected. Hopefully we'll do that quicker and it'll be sharper. That puts more money in people's pockets. So the worst thing to possibly do to take money out of people's pockets is to have an economy that's not sustainable. And none of these tax threshold freezes, they don't kick in until 28, 29, 29, 30. And therefore there's no changes to people's take-home pay today or tomorrow.
No, I suppose, we won't really see or feel the full effect of the budget for a couple of years, but hopefully it'll be going in the right direction. But in season Rachel will still be the chancellor in a couple of years, because it was a pretty calamitous time on the run up.
But don't forget, the most calamitous part of the budget was the Office for Budget Responsibility publishing the budget documents.
Yeah,
I mean, that's a criminal act. It's not just a clumsy act, it's a criminal act. And I'm starting to wonder whether or not there are a few there are a few malign forces in the Treasury and in the government and in other organisations that are I'm not saying this is what's happened at the OBR, but there's now a consistent thread of leaks and briefings coming out that shouldn't be, that are undermining the whole process, which is why the budget's turning into such a frenzy.
and the leaks just around the budget or, rather there's leaks on other areas of policy.
Well, there's leaks on all sorts of stuff. The digital ID thing leaked the day
Yeah.
before, which was not even the policy of the government, but it was, and that's what then grew arms and legs. The budget leaked. All lots of aspects of the budget leaked. The welfare stuff leaked, and all of that set the policy off on the wrong footing because the leaks were not on what the policies were. The leaks were on what the person wanted to leak for maximum damage, and these are the kind of things that
Yeah.
happen in government. And it's little wonder then that the public confidence in government is subsequently undermined
Yeah. Yeah.
because they see these leaks and then a lie's halfway around the world before the truth gets its boots on them, particularly in the social media age.
Yeah. And I was going to ask you, in your new ministerial position, are you involved with the social media policy, and your role as culture media secretary or
Yeah,
minister?
and actually, because I cross over into the Department for Science, Innovation, and Technology as well, really got a big handle on online safety, mis and disinformation. And I won't put too fine a point in it, David. I think we're at a moment in time in terms of our democracy that we are battling to save our democratic processes in these countries, in this country and other countries, because of mis and disinformation,
Yeah.
deep fakes, fake accounts, the way social media can manipulate. It's a
Yeah.
real problem for anyone who believes in democracy, whether you're left, right, or anywhere else. If we don't resolve this issue, I think we could be in a pretty dark place pretty quickly.
Yeah. And but I wouldn't like to be the one who tries to come up with a way of trying to controlling it. Uh, it just seems so difficult. It's like the genius well to at the bottom. I know, I couldn't think how to begin to get a handle
Yeah, but I think what we should also do though is
on
look on it from a rather than from a controlling perspective or a regulatory perspective, which is really important, we should look at championing the stuff that does have an editorial eye over it and does have a professional journalist behind it and is checked and does come with high standards. So that's why the BBC is so important. It's why our public sector media companies and broadcasters are so important. It's why our newspapers are so important. The drivers of, as much as I disagree with the way in which some of the print media in particular report things
it.
at the moment, at least it comes with a journalistic integrity and editorial control, and at least it's
Yeah.
truthful and there's no mis or disinformation in there unless they're trying to do it deliberately. But so we have to champion that local news, where people are getting their news and their current affairs from is really important. And that's why, and particularly in national life, the BBC News and our public sector broadcast news is really, really important. So we should champion that and point people towards it without necessarily saying we should regulate stuff that's not as of high quality.
Yeah, I got frustrated a few years ago. People have that real dig at the BBC, saying this is the end of the BBC and the terrible and the bias. I think, we're so lucky to have the BBC and the quality of journalism, but I'm sure it's not without imperfections. Uh, but on the whole, the BBC is watched by billions of people across the globe, and I think we're so lucky and proud, should be proud to have. And it bugs me the people that have a go at it because and by that I probably blame the government for that because there's been always a revolving door between number 10 and the BBC and say, well, if you don't want to be seen to the bias, don't put people like Robbie Gibb, on the board and say, what do you expect? So, yeah, that's a bit of a rant for me.
And David, that most of this stuff is built on perception. And I don't know Robbie Gibb as an individual. I don't know if he does bring bias. I don't know if there is a revolving door between number 10 and the BBC. Even setting all of that aside, it's just public perception, isn't it? And if the public
Yeah,
perception is of political interference, that undermines the entirety of the BBC.
that's right. the way it looks should be enough to stop it happening.
Yeah. And I would just I always pose the question the other way around, is to say, just imagine what life would be like in this country without the BBC, either
Uh,
historically or today, and it wouldn't be worth thinking about. And if you think of those big national moments, think about the final of Traitors that was watched by 12 million people. Think about Strictly on a Saturday night. Think about the
okay.
Eurovision Song Contest. Think about, BBC Radio 2 and Radio 4, for example. And think about the football last Tuesday night. It was across
Yeah.
net on BBC Two, and it was on BBC One Scotland. And had that not been on the BBC free to air, that national moment of Scotland qualifying for the World Cup would have been behind some kind of expensive paywall somewhere that would have been watched by about a tenth of the population that actually watched.
Yeah. Okay.
So having the BBC is hugely important for not just news and current affairs and that and fighting against mis and disinformation, but also it's there for our big national moments of celebration and of what brings people together. And my God, we could do more of that.
Of course. And I hope but do you think it'll survive because there's a lot of people out to get it right now, and a lot of people to bring it in. Do you think it will survive long term?
Well, there's a process happening at the moment, which my new portfolio is responsible for charter renewal. So the BBC's set up by Royal Charter. That Royal Charter lasts for 10 years and it's up for renewal on the 31st of December 2027. So the process of renewing charter is happening now. And the charter does a whole host of things. It's everything from what the BBC does, where it does it, how it does it, complaints, who runs it, how it's run, and also how it's funded. And all of that will be part of the charter renewal process. The green paper should be published shortly. It will set the terms of reference for that. So yes, the charter in 2027 for the next 10 years to 2037 is huge. We have to get it right, and we have to save and secure the BBC for the future.
But do you think uh, it should remain funded by the taxpayer?
Well, that's going to be a big part of that's going to be a big part of of this charter renewal, because the big issue now for the BBC is people's habits and viewing habits are changing. The number of people that are actually paying the TV license is falling because people don't need one in a lot of instances. Is the funding model for the BBC sustainable? What gives it a sustainable future? All of those questions will come into this charter renewal process, and we need to examine and look at them all, because my fundamental principle is, how do we have a sustainable financial future for the BBC, and what does that look like?
Yeah, I sincerely hope it remains in its current form or thereabouts, because I think I'm very lucky to have it, and I've always sing its praises. So, and Ian, I thoroughly enjoyed talking to you again today. Thank you so much for your time. It's been great.
Well, it's been great. It's always good to see you. Always brilliant to come on the podcast, and good luck at the podcast awards. I'll be rooting for you.